friends, and today I have come up with the part 2 of pollination chapter explanation. So in the part 1 we learned up to this the four whorls of the flower, then what are those whorls and what is it made of and everything. Here we learned about androecium, gynoecium, carpels, stamens, pollen grains, calyx, corolla, sepal, petal, pedicel, thalamus, many things, and the structure of the flower too. And in this part we are going to learn about the types of flowers. So flowers can be broadly classified into bisexual and monosexual flowers. Means there are two types of flowers. They are the bisexual flowers and the monosexual flowers. Now bisexual flowers, what are these? These flowers have both the androecium and the gynoecium. It means that these have the male reproductive part androecium and the female reproductive part gynoecium also. For example, hibiscus, jasmine, rose are bisexual flowers. Now let's learn about monosexual flowers. Okay, so what are these flowers? These flowers have either the androecium or the gynoecium. Means like it is the opposite. Like in the bisexual flowers, it has both the androecium and gynoecium. But in monosexual flowers, we don't have that. We have either the male reproductive part androecium or either the female reproductive part gynoecium. For example, papaya, maize, watermelon are monosexual flowers. Now we will learn about pollinations. Okay, now these are male papaya flowers showing only the androecium. Okay, and this is we are going to learn now what is self-pollination and what is cross-pollination. Okay, so let's learn. During reproduction, the male and the female reproductive cells fuse. Therefore, it is necessary for the pollen grains to reach the stigma. It means that when the reproduction is going on, at that time, the male and the female reproductive cells fuse together in order to form a new individual. Therefore, it is necessary for the pollen grains to reach the stigma. Means that when the reproduction occurs, at that time it is very much necessary for the pollen grains to reach the stigma. And what is the stigma? It is the part of the gynoecium. The part of this gynoecium. Okay, so now what is it? Stigma, I told you, a sticky stigma at the top and a slender lock-like style connecting the two. Okay, so this is the stigma. Okay, now let's see what it tells next. The process by which the pollen grains are transferred from the anther of a flower to the stigma is called pollination. It means the process through which the pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma is called pollination. What is the anther? This one is the anther, right? It is the part of the what? The male reproductive part androecium, and this is the anther. Okay, and the androecium consists of anther and filament, and gynoecium consists of stigma, style and ovary. Okay, so now let's see what it tells. The process by which the pollen grains are transferred from the anther of flower to the stigma is called pollination. So what is pollination? The process by which the pollen grains are transferred from the anther of a flower to the stigma is called pollination. Now pollination is also divided into two types. So don't get confused that pollination is divided into two parts, that are bisexual and monosexual. It is wrong. The pollination is divided into two types, that are self-pollination and cross-pollination, and the flowers are divided into two parts, that are bisexual flowers and monosexual flowers. So don't get confused among these two. Now what is self-pollination? If the pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the same flower or another flower from the same plant, it is called self-pollination. For example, sunflower and pea plants, they show self-pollination. Means, see here in this structure, these are the pollen grains, means these are the anther and these are the filaments, and here the pollen grains are. So when a pollination agent, the agent of pollination like bee, butterfly, sunbird, etc., comes and takes the pollination onto its mouth and again drops it in the same plant flower, it is called self pollination. In Bengali it is যখন অ্যান্থারের যে পলিন গ্রেনসগুলো আছে সেই পলিন গ্রেনস থেকে যখন কোনো এজেন্ট আসে, সেই এজেন্ট যখন মুখ থেকে তার সেই পোলেন গ্রেনসগুলো সেই প্ল্যান্টেরই আরেকটা ফ্লাওয়ারের উপর ফেলে, তাহলে তাকে বলা হয় সেলফ পলিনেশন। হোয়াট ইজ ইট কল্ড? সেলফ পলিনেশন। ওকে, now what are the examples? Sunflower, pea plants, etc. Now what is cross pollination? If the pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of a flower from another plant, it is called cross pollination. And another thing here it is that it should be of the same species, not another species. Like if the agent is taking from a sunflower and it is dropping onto a rose or any marigold type, then it will not work. It has to again drop it on a sunflower. Okay, so that is the main thing. Now cross pollination, most of the plants show cross pollination. So what is cross pollination? Now we have to understand it by this diagram. So this is an agent of pollination. Now this agent is taking the pollination, pollen grains from the anther and dropping it to another flower, means the same species but to another plant's flower. That is known as cross pollination. In Bengali it is যখন কোনো পলিনেশনের এজেন্ট এসে একটা সানফ্লাওয়ার থেকে তার পলিন গ্রেনসটা নিয়ে আরেকটা সানফ্লাওয়ার প্ল্যান্টের ফ্লাওয়ারে গিয়ে ফেলে, তাকে বলে ক্রস পলিনেশন। আর সেলফ পলিনেশনে কী হলো, ওখানে এজেন্টটা পলিন গ্রেনসটা নিয়ে সেই গাছেরই আরেকটা ফুলে ফেলে দিল। আন্ডারস্টুড? So what is this process known as? This process is known as cross pollination. Okay, so now agents of pollination, I was talking about it. The transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma happens in different ways. Means the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma does not happen in only one way. It happens in many different ways. You know that the color, the smell and nectar attracts insects and small animals. It means the petals are the most colorful part of the flower. The petal and the nectar attracts insects and small animals. We discussed about nectar and petal in the part 1. I hope you all remember it and know it. When an insect, a sunbird or a bat visits a flower to drink nectar, some of the mature pollen grains stick to the wings or the body of these animals. As I told you in these two structures, stick to the wings or the body of these animals. Now what are the agents? Insects and birds. Pollination by a bee, like this. Pollination by a butterfly, it is like this. And pollination by a sunbird. Now when the animal visits the next flower to the pollen grains could fall on the stigma, thus completing the process of pollination. As I told you in the self pollination and in the cross pollination, the process of pollination happens with the help of insects, birds, winds or water. Not only with insects and birds, with wind and water it is also possible. These are called the agents of pollination. What are agents of pollination? The process of pollination happens with the help of insects, birds, winds or water. These are called the agents of pollination. Now flowers are adapted to make sure that the agent of pollination is successful in pollinating the flower. Okay, now the flowers have to make sure that the agent of pollination is successful in pollinating the flower. Now the table, the characteristics of flowers pollinated by different ways. As I told you in this Now, flowers pollinated by the wind, flowers pollinated by water, and flowers pollinated by insects. Petals. The petals in the flowers that are pollinated by the wind are small, dull colored with no smell. And the flowers that are pollinated by water, their petals are small, dull colored with no smell, same as the wind. And the flowers pollinated by insects, the petals are large, brightly colored with smell. Nectar. The flowers pollinated by the wind, the nectar is absent. In the water pollination is also it is absent, but in the flowers pollinated by insects it is present. Stamen. What are stamens? Androecium are made with one or more stamens, and they are also known as stamens. Means androecium you can also call it stamen. In the flowers pollinated by the wind, the stamens are long and exposed to wind. And the flowers pollinated by water, they are same, but here it is wind and here it is water, long and exposed to water. And the flowers pollinated by insects, the stamen is short and hidden by the petals. Now, stigma. The stigma in the flowers pollinated by the wind are large and feathery, and the flowers pollinated by water, the stigma are large and sticky, and the flowers pollinated by insects, the stigma is short and sticky. Pollen. The pollen grains in the flowers pollinated that are pollinated by wind, the pollen grains are light, smooth, and produced in large amounts. And the pollen grains in the flowers pollinated by water, they light, smooth, waterproof, produced in large amount. Both are produced in large amounts. And flowers that are pollinated by insects, the pollen grains are coarse, sticky, produced in limited amounts, not a large amount. Okay. Example of flowers pollinated by the wind, it is grass, maize, paddy, etc. Flowers pollinated by wind, water, examples are hydrilla, vallisneria, etc. And examples of flowers pollinated by insects, rose, hibiscus, orchid, etc. So thank you for watching my today's video, and don't forget to watch my video, like my video, and subscribe my channel and comment on my videos. Thank you. Bye. See you in my next video. Till then, mwah.